Read alcoholic.
Agreed.
Wow. I'll be honest, I was definitely hoping that the time change would trip more of you up, but I certainly underestimated you all. I was meeting with my sponsor a few weeks ago, and I told him, I said, I'm telling my story for the first time, and I really don't want to get up there and, not really know where I'm going with this, or, I want to tell a cohesive story, and so I've been trying to jot things down here and there. Maybe I'll do an outline. And he looked at me and he said, I have an outline for you. It's called What It Was Like, What Happened, and What It's Like Now. And so this morning, that's what I'm going to tell you. That's my outline. So I was born here in Dallas in 1987. I have two... What? I have two loving parents, two brothers. My childhood really... I had a good childhood. I was pretty to myself. I was very independent. There was quite a bit of chaos in my home. Both my brothers had lots of learning disabilities, behavioral, emotional, mental health issues. And I had, or at least I thought I had, this understanding with my parents, and the conversation went a little bit something like this. Like, hey, you two, it looks like you've got your hands full with these two lunatics over here. So I think I can handle what I need. If you just stay out of my way, I'll stay out of yours. How about that? I just need a little money, a house to sleep in, food, and regretfully I'm 7, so I can't drive. So I'll need a ride to and from places. But even with that, from a young age, I was looking for a way to escape, right? And I don't always know, what that was, but maybe it was the chaos in my home. And I found that at a really young age in gymnastics, and that basically became my entire childhood. I loved it. I was obsessed with it. I would go to practice. I was practicing 6 days a week, 4 or 5 hours a day from a pretty young age. And when I wasn't there, I was watching videos at home. It was like I could be in my own world, and I didn't really need anyone else. I didn't need a lot of friends. I certainly didn't need the chaos of my brothers. And so that became my life. That became my identity. That became my sole determination of my self-worth. I loved it because what it taught me was that if I worked really hard and I was very focused and disciplined, I could usually control the outcome. And that's what I took from it. And then I got to go perform, right? I got to go show everyone that I could handle the pressure all by myself. And you got to see how perfect or close to perfect I could be. And then you would all clap and give me medals and trophies. And, what kid or, even adult doesn't like that? And I did that my whole life. Like I said, I went to college for gymnastics, and that's where the drinking started. I actually had my first drink when I was a senior in high school. It was administered by my parents. They really didn't like the idea of me going to college, never having had a drink. So they gave me one, and I really don't have much memory of it. I don't think I even finished it. I just was so focused on other things, right? And nothing was going to get in the way of me getting to my goals in gymnastics. And so I went to college, and I drank when I got to college, but I was a student athlete, so my schedule was pretty strict. Really, I could only manage to party maybe one night a week. But the first sign that drinking was maybe going to be a problem was when my sophomore year, I was pretty much at the peak of my gymnastics career, and I tore my Achilles. I actually tore it twice in a 4-month period. And so for a solid year, I wasn't able to train. And at that point, having that pulled out from under me, I didn't really see a reason or a purpose, not to just have a good time. And I was extremely devastated because to me, that was the end. And so, during that time, I started drinking daily. I really just had to be at summer school class when it got to its worst, and do some strength and conditioning and rehab for my injury. But I was drinking daily, and I I don't remember how I figured this out, but I figured out that my pain pills were much more effective if I, crushed them up and snorted them. So these things probably should have been a warning, but, I thought it all seemed pretty normal. So yeah, that was that. And I mentioned this because the big thing I got out of this was as soon as I was rehabilitated and able to return back to training and competing, I stopped all that. The drinking went back to social, maybe one night a week. And, I wasn't getting pain scripts anymore. And so I held on to that for a long time, that if I had something I was passionate about, something that my life was about, gave me a purpose and a meaning, then I'd be fine. And the drinking wouldn't be a problem. So when I stopped gymnastics, after college, I was extremely lost. And, I don't want to spend too much time in this period because I want to get to more recent history. But my 20s was a progression of drinking being a problem. I certainly went through phases. Like I said, I was lost. I wanted to escape. I struggled with mental health issues, eating disorders, and all along the way, phases of lots of partying and drugs and everything that comes with that. And all along the way, it started creeping in my head that this was going to be a problem. And if I didn't figure it out, this could all end very badly. And so I started trying to find ways to fix it. I would ask my psychiatrist, my psychologist, and I don't know if you know, but they don't treat alcoholism. And so they didn't have any good answers. Self-help books. I went back to church and a Bible study for a period of time thinking maybe that would save me. And I was really, really wanting to find something like gymnastics, something that would save me from this problem. That was going to be the answer, right? So, and in this time, things weren't unmanageable. I got my master's degree, I got my CPA certification, and went to work for one of the big 4 accounting firms. And I was a high performer, but the alcohol started to catch up with me, and so, and my solutions weren't working, like I said, and it led me, to basically cut out everything and everyone in my life, because if I could just focus in on me, then everything would be better. And my other solution was to get overprescribed for Adderall, and I'm not going to go down that road, but that was not pretty. We can get in a real rabbit hole there. But it led me to rehab for the first time in 2018. And I did sober living after that out in California. It was very much, my thought process behind that was that going to rehab and sober living was going to fix me. I'll come back home and I can go back to doing things my way, just without alcohol. It didn't work out like that. I started drinking, and that's actually when I went to AA for the first time. I remember, because when I first told my parents that I wanted to go to rehab the first time, I was talking to them, and my dad said, whoa, don't you think that's a little drastic? I mean, don't people usually start like with some 12-step meetings? And I said, that sounds drastic. I'm going to go to rehab. That sounds much nicer. And so, it didn't work. And I remember going to Lambda at that time, and I was never staying sober for more than maybe 2 days, if I'm being honest. And I remember going to meetings and just hoping and praying that something would happen in that meeting and I would stay sober. But at least for me, it doesn't work that way. I didn't get a sponsor. I wasn't willing to do the work. And eventually, and I heard what you guys had to say, but I was searching for differences. I thought I could still do it my way. And that, I eventually stopped going. I went back to just working, drinking, and it progressed. Finally, in fall of 2019, after being taken to the ER by my mother and detoxing, and I'd been in pretty bad shape. I can remember going to, before that, going to like client meetings, and I would start withdrawing about noon. And I would have like a client lunch, and I would be so nervous because I couldn't even reach to get my water, to take a drink of water, without being scared I was going to spill it in front of a client. I had to be careful about what I picked to eat. It had to be something very simple that I could just kind of pick on and push around. I remember being at a client one time, and I usually would take a team member that could kind of take notes, and they weren't able to make it at the last minute. And so I'm sitting there and I couldn't write because I was shaking so bad. And that living in that fear and anxiety every day was miserable. So I got sober in late 2019. And after a few months, I went to meetings, but that's about all I was willing to do. And, after a few months, I just decided, I'm going to redirect myself and all my energy to work again, as if I should have learned my lesson by then, that getting approval and achievements wasn't going to fix all my problems. It wasn't going to make me feel better. And so I went into isolation. The pandemic hit, some personal things happened. And I'd gone to stay up with my parents, and I don't even know what went through my mind at that moment, but I just grabbed a bottle of my mom's Deep Eddy's vodka and took that bad boy upstairs and just went right back to town on it. And I think I go back and I think a lot about like what didn't work, because at first it wasn't very obvious to me. Now it is. And why wasn't I willing to do the work? Why was I so scared? And I've talked about this in meetings before, but I had spent my whole life doing things to put up this wall and this idea that I had it all together, that I was perfect, all these achievements and all your approval. And I built that wall so that you couldn't see what was really going on. And I drank usually so that I could be on the other side of that wall too. And this program and the steps wanted me to not just look at that myself, but to share it with other people. And I wasn't willing to do that. I wasn't ready. I wasn't willing. So I started drinking again, and, it was, May of 2020, to about early September. And I was up at my parents'. It's the pandemic, so I'm working up there all the time. My mental state is not great, so my parents don't trust me to live alone at that point, which is also a common theme that went on over those past few years. And so, like I said, I just started drinking just where it left off. And at first, I could wait until about 4 o'clock. I could make it that far. And then I had a routine. I'd get in the car. There was a liquor store just down 121 off Exchange or somewhere over there, McKinney Allen. And I would pull up, and as soon as I got that bottle in my hand, I could breathe again. Everything, it was gonna be okay. And then I'd get in the car, I'd pull around to the back, and I'd pop that bottle open, and I'd go ahead and take a couple swigs there in the car. And then I'd head back to my parents, maybe a couple swigs while I was driving, because that's responsible. And then I would try to work. And, the window's pretty small when you're drinking straight from a vodka bottle. And when you're doing tax accounting, the cells in Excel start to blur a little bit, and I would give up pretty quickly. Also that summer, I don't know if I mentioned, but I think I did. I had about a 1.5 year love affair with Adderall. My mom has a much needed prescription for Adderall. So what I did is I was becoming more and more hungover, and I did this for several months while I was up there. She would refill her prescription, and she didn't mind if I took 1 or 2. She really didn't. She never really was privy to the fact that I even struggled with Adderall. She just knew that I had it at one point, and then I suddenly didn't. And so I'd take 1 or 2, but then I would take, they were extended release, so I'd take the capsule and I would pour all 30 of them. I would pour about half of it out, put the capsule back together, put it back in the bottle. So that way she didn't know that she was always getting just a little bit less than she was used to. And I would use that up pretty quickly. Because I love changing the way that I feel, right? So I would use that pretty quickly. I'd get some work done. But it got to the point that I was drinking starting pretty early in the day. I wasn't able to work anymore. I can remember when I would start drinking in the morning. And again, I'm very responsible, so I wasn't going to drink and drive, but I needed more alcohol. And I really didn't like stealing from my parents because then I had to replace it because I didn't want to have to explain to them where all their nice wine had gone, why half a handle of vodka was suddenly missing. So I would use a liquor delivery service. But the problem with that is my mom was also working from home and her office is right at the front. So I could only really do that when she maybe had to go run an errand. And I remember one time she was running an errand and I had ordered liquor and it was taking longer. I mean, you know how those delivery services are. And I said, hey, when you're done at the doctor, be sure to text me. I might need you to run an errand. And she said, all right. So she texts me, and sure enough, I mean, it's 45 minutes till that delivery is coming, and I've got a problem. I can't cancel it. I mean, I could, but I didn't want to. So I sent her, God, I must have sent her on 5 or 6 errands. Hey, can you go get me this? Yeah, listen, I also need you to pick this up. And I really need a smoothie right now. And sure enough, it got delivered. She had no idea. But like I said, I was drinking starting in the morning, and it got to the point that I couldn't work, and I was miserable. I was to the point that I was so tired. I was exhausted. I was so tired of drinking, but more than that, I was so tired of trying to prove myself to everyone. I was so tired of being alone, of being in pain all the time and feeling like there was no way out. And it was really dark. But I'm grateful for that because I had to admit that I was out of solutions. I was out of ideas. My plans weren't working. So I remember I decided I was going to go back to rehab, the same place that I went the first time. But this time it was going to be different. And I remember the day before I left for rehab, I was having a complete meltdown. I'd already had a few swigs of alcohol that morning. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but I was having a full out meltdown upstairs. My mom heard me and she came upstairs and I just came undone. And I told her, I said, I need help. I can't do this by myself. And I started pulling all the empty liquor bottles out from everywhere in that room, from under the bathroom sink, out of the dresser, under the bed, behind the headboard, the nightstands, and it was very dramatic. I was throwing them on the bed and just sobbing and like bending over because I couldn't breathe. And my mom is just sitting there, and she's crying, but I have to imagine she was also just like, this psychopath. And then what I did next, I'll never forget the look on my mom's face. I said I took her Adderall. Well, I still had a stash, because, I'd empty those salts into a small container and hide that in a very special place. So I pulled those out and I explained to her what they were and what I had done and I had been doing. And she just looked at me and I looked at her like, you just put them on your tongue, or if you want, you could crush them up and snort them. And she just is like, and she took them. I don't know if she used them or not, but I think probably not. And so I went back to rehab, and when I got back, I lived in sober living here in Dallas, over in Lakewood, for about 4 months, and that was really important for me because of my tendency to isolate, even from when I was a kid. Right, I didn't mind being alone. In fact, sometimes I prefer it. And I needed, even though I could have stayed at my parents', I was still paying rent on an apartment in Dallas. I needed to be forced to be around other people. And so I'm very grateful that I was able to do that for 4 months. I also got, I had a sponsor before, but it really isn't much use when you don't ever talk to him. So I got a sponsor, and I started working the steps. And I was ready this time, and I was ready to do the work. I was finally desperate. And so steps 1 through 3, I could have told you for years that my life was unmanageable. What I wasn't ready for was admitting that I was 100% powerless. I would maybe tell you 95% before that. And that I didn't have the solution to restore me to sanity. I still thought I could figure something out. I could figure it out. I could find that meaning, that purpose. I could find something else that would replace the alcohol. But I finally was at the point where I knew that what you guys were telling me, in the light of my own circumstances, I had become willing, and I had become desperate. And the philosophy of self-sufficiency wasn't paying off. And so it was finally time, and I was finally ready to turn this all over to God, to turn my will over to God, to stop fighting myself. And so that was my 1 through 3, and then 4 and 5. So, even with that wall, I felt like I had told at least someone, bits and pieces to different people, right? But I had never shared the full picture with anyone, and I certainly hadn't looked at it myself. So it was definitely illuminating to see that all laid out in front of me, and to see the patterns of behavior that I had never caught on to. The fears, and that I'd been living in fear. Before I started, my sponsor told me, "I'll give you a little sneak peek. Everything's going to go back to fear," and it did, and it still does when I'm having trouble. And being the OCD perfectionist accountant type that I am, I also put all my fears and my defects and my patterns into Excel spreadsheets. And I went through that 4th step, and I ranked them based on frequency, so that I could really get a real picture of this disaster. And then I shared it with my sponsor, and that was important because it was an important step for me to start taking down the walls, right? To free myself from isolation and loneliness. And I'll never forget when I went to share my 4th step and do step 5 with my sponsor. He's a very he's sitting right here. He's a very put together person, and every time I go over to meet with him, he always has on the same outfit, right? A button-up shirt, his hair is done, and he sits comfortably but up straight, and we get to business. And I looked at him and I said, "This is 32 pages handwritten. Are you sure you want me to go through this one by one? You don't want the highlights?" And he said, "No, we're going to go through the whole thing." And I'm glad we did. But when we got to the end of it, I swear, and maybe it's exaggerated in my head, but he was disheveled. He no longer was sitting up straight. He was like this. And I just was like, "Okay, I'm done." And he was like, "Okay." And then we talked about it. I'll never forget that. But we talked about it, and then he sent me on my way to do 6 and 7, or as he called it, the voodoo of steps 6 and 7. Spending time in reflection and asking God humbly asking God to remove my shortcomings. And I do that every day. That's part of my daily routine, is to ask God to remove my shortcomings, because I don't have the ability to do that, and to make use of my assets in a way according to his will. So that was that was 6 and 7. So 8 and 9, I thought, other than, maybe a few things on my inventory related to my days of partying, but I really thought the darker years, based on the fact that I had cut everyone out of my life, meant that I didn't hurt anyone. So maybe I just didn't really owe many amends. But that it was pointed out to me that was very flawed thinking. Because I had hurt people. I mean, it's hurtful to be cut out of someone's life. And my parents, I mean, I had never thought about this until looking at where I was wrong. And at 2 points in my adulthood, I had, they had told me I had to stay with them because I was a risk. But I had them living in fear every day. Every day they were living, wondering what was going to happen, what I was going to drink, what drugs I was going to be getting into next, whether I'd be alive the next day. And to be living in your own home like that, and in my head at the time, like, you told me to stay here, like, you get what you asked for. But it's so wrong. And my parents there's still a lot of a fear around that, and that it's still sometimes hard for me to recognize that I did. It's not hard for me to recognize. It's emotionally difficult because, there's times I moved into living with a friend after sober living that didn't work out. And so I moved into an apartment by myself again in early June of this year. And I remember one day I was taking a nap and my mom was trying to get a hold of me, and this has happened on more than one occasion, but she called me repeatedly because I wasn't answering. I was taking a long nap. And texted me, and I called her back and I said, "Jesus, what?" And immediately she said, "You're not okay. You're not okay." And I said, "Well, I was until this." I was having a great day. I was taking a lovely nap. But I know that that's what I did. And I've made amends for that, but that's a process. They still live in fear of what happens when I go inward instead of outward with my problems. Where was I? My sponsor also informed me, and he made me aware that a lot of people don't really, they find this a shock, but that financial amends are made with money. And really, luckily for me, I'm still making financial amends to some of my family, but I also come from a family of extremely cheap, business-minded people. So at any point that I've ever taken money from my family or asked for money, it comes with a signed note agreement, an amortization schedule, and 6% interest. So I was already set up to make financial amends. I wasn't getting away with anything like with that, any fast ones on my family. And I'll be paying those back for a while. Step 10, I'm not perfect at step 10, but I do try every night as I get ready for bed to reflect on my day and see if there was anywhere where I was wrong and I owe an amends. But more than that, I try to stay aware throughout the day, so that I before I go into a situation as to how I'm going to handle it, and when I come out of it, how did I handle it? Do I owe anyone an amends? I think in the 12 and 12 it calls this a spot check inventory, where you're just kind of aware, and that helps keep me out of trouble. And I think like most of us, I don't like making amends, so I like to avoid them if at all possible. Step 11, prayer and meditation are also a big part of my daily routine. You know, I start every morning, and sometimes throughout the day if I'm really having a hard time, with third step prayer and turning my will over to God. And when I start to get off track with my prayer and meditation, it starts to become pretty obvious. My foundation starts to waver. I start going back to that person that is constantly fighting myself, fighting for my will. And then I'll find myself at the end of the day so annoyed and frustrated that I'm just saying out loud, I can't stand myself. Like, this is insanity. And so I know this program, and you guys have taught me what to do when that happens, and that's to get back on track. Step 12. So, you know, a spiritual awakening for me, I think some things in working the steps were instant, but mostly it's been gradual. And the more time that goes by and I look back, the more that I see the spiritual awakening that I've been having and that I continue to have. And you guys have taught me to practice these principles in all my affairs and how to do that. You know, showing up for family, it's a two-way street. It's not all about taking from them. And the same goes for you guys. You know, it's this give and take. It's a partnership that we're in to help each other. And I keep commitments. I was terrible about that. I show up at places when I don't want to be there. I don't cancel at the last minute, and I find ways to be of service. And while I haven't had the chance to sponsor, I do have the opportunity every day to make a difference in how I show up in the world. And whether it's through my words or my actions, I have opportunities to carry this message, to carry experience, strength, and hope to other people. So yeah, that is my experience with the 12 steps. What is it like today? Well, let's see. How much time do I have? You know, it's not lost on me that not everyone can do this, but I am extremely grateful that I continued to be on leave from work ever since I went to rehab last fall, up until a few weeks ago. And why I say that I'm so grateful for that is because it took away the opportunities for me to try to identify myself with anything other than this program, to prove myself, to attach to anything else like that. And instead, all I had to focus on for a year was proving my commitment to this program and proving my willingness to this program. And I will always be grateful that I was able to do that. And so a few weeks ago, I resigned from that job at the Big Four firm that I've been at my entire career. And I had known that I wasn't going to go back as soon as I went to rehab last year. But it was a lot harder to resign than I thought it was. And it brought up a lot of shame, a lot of disappointment, because the past few years there, that's not how it was supposed to work out. I had done so well, and then it all fell apart. It didn't go according to my plan. And I was pretty, it brought up those emotions and those feelings, but it was a perfect reminder as I got ready to start a new job as to what happens when I run the show. It only goes so well for so long before I inevitably will tear it all down. And then also, I started a new job this past Monday, which I'm grateful for. And in the weeks building up to that, I also had a lot of fear come up around what that was going to look like. I hadn't worked in a year. I had a long history of pulling away or pushing everyone away and focusing just on that so that I could get approval and I could get, the bonuses and the achievement and the raises and the promotions. And I had a lot of fear, like, am I going to go back to that? And I even had feelings come up like, hey, I should probably start in preparation for this. Go ahead and pushing some people away. Probably should cut down my meetings. But I have a solution now when that happens, when all that fear comes up and those feelings of what are really my natural instinct of how to deal with them when those start peeking around. And those solutions are to reach outward to God, to my sponsor, to you guys, instead of going inward. To reevaluate and reexamine my daily routine. Am I staying on track with my prayer and meditation? Am I living in the steps? And working with my sponsor on setting boundaries and intentions for what going back to work looks like. How many meetings a week will you go to? How much sleep will you get every night? Just eat basic stuff like that. And remembering, as basic as it is, just to take it one day at a time. And that's what you guys have taught me that. And so I want to start to land the plane with the things that I'm most grateful for. I'm grateful for the relationships that this program gives me. A relationship with a higher power, with you guys, relationships that were missing from my life for so long. And knowing in those relationships that even when things get hard, I don't ever have to go back to that place of suffering and that loneliness all by myself. And I will have the opportunity to help other people come out of that place of loneliness and suffering and know that they too are free from that. And I have the opportunity, like I said, to be of service every day in different ways, both in the program and out of the program. And I think one of the things I'm most grateful for is that I have a meaning and a purpose that I talked about searching for that my whole life, that's far more important than anything I could have come up with myself. And this program has given me that. As it says in the 12 and 12, my drives have been restored to something of their true purpose and direction. And true ambition isn't what I thought it was. True ambition is the deep desire to live usefully and to walk humbly under the grace of God. Thank you.